Hi Year 7, it's Miss Piper. I'm sorry I'm not in your lesson today, but I thought I'd make you a video so I could still teach you. So I want you to write the title and the date neatly at the top of a new page. So the title is Expanding Brackets and the date is the 22nd of the 9th, 2020. Okay, so if you think back to last week, one of the last things that we did was think about some algebraic relationships in relation to our 10 by 10 100 grid. Okay, and loads of you were really excellent at this, and you told me that if whatever number was here was called n, then the one to the right was one bigger than that, so we could call it n plus 1. And the one 2 to the right was 2 bigger, so we could call it n plus 2. And some of you managed to say that the one on the left of it would be 1 less, and we could call it n minus 1. Okay. And also there were some that had some boxes going down, and you managed to tell me that if whatever number was here was called n, the one that's below it, so say this was 24, the one below it would be 34, that we could say that it was 10 bigger, so we could call it n plus 10, and the one below that would be 10 bigger again, so we could call it n plus 20. Now, we're going to think about the reason, we're going to think back even further, and we're going to think about the reason for us doing that. Okay, so if we think back to the very, very start of our investigation about diagonal differences, we started with 2 by 2 squares on our 100 grid. So we did this number times this number, and this number times this number, and then we subtracted the smaller one from the bigger one. Now we did it for loads of different numbers, loads of different 2 by 2 squares, but we didn't do it for all of them. So we haven't proved that the difference was 10 for all of them. We've just assumed. So we're going to try and use some algebra to prove it. So this number here is n, okay, in the top left, and the number to the right would be n plus 1, just like this one and this one. And then the number below it, anyone know what it is? See if anyone can shout it out this once. It would be n plus 10. So the one below is 10 bigger. And then this one would be 1 bigger than this one. So it would be n plus 11. Now, if we were going to do this number times this number, we'd do n times n plus 11. We could write that like that because we're a bit lazy in maths, and sometimes we don't bother to write the time signs, especially with algebra. So if two things are next to each other, they're multiplied together. And we could work out what that was. And the other multiplication we'd do is this one times this one. So we'd do n plus 1. So I'm going to put it in brackets just to show that it's a thing. And we're going to times that by n plus 10. And again, I'm going to be lazy, so I want to save as much ink from my pen as I can. So I'm going to put them next to each other without the times sign. So what this lesson is going to be practicing is multiplying things like this or multiplying things like this. Okay, so things like this, we're going to go through an example here, and things like this we're going to go through an example afterwards as an extension. And then if you think you managed to do it, you can come back and fill in the answers to these. Okay, so hopefully the teacher could just pause the video now and you could copy this into your book. And then once you're done, we can start the example. Okay, so let's go through some examples. So I don't want you to write them down in your book at the moment, but once we've gone through all three, I'd like the teacher to pause the video and then you can copy them down. Okay, so this first one, this number that's outside the bracket is multiplying everything inside the bracket. Okay, so first of all, that 4 is multiplying the n, and then it's multiplying the 2. So both of those things are being times by the 4. So the first one, 4 times n, we can write that as 4n. Okay, so if a letter is times by a number, we can just write the two things next to each other with the number first. And then 4 is timesing the 2. So 4 times 2 is 8. So that's it, 4n plus 8. The next one, that 5 is multiplying that p. So just like this, the number is timesing the letter, so we can just write them together, 5p. And then the 5 is timesing 6, and 5 times 6, 5 times positive 6 is positive 30. So that's the answer, 5p plus 30. And then this last example, the 2 is multiplying the s. So it's a number and a letter, so I can just write them next to each other. 2 times s is 2s. And then the 2 is timesing negative 3. So 2 times negative 3, well, 2 times 3 is 6. So 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. So 2s minus 6 is the answer. So I'd like the teacher to pause the video in a minute. I'd like you to write all of those examples really neatly in your book, and then you can have a go at the first section of the worksheet that you've got. And then in a little while, if people seem like they're finishing, put up your hand, okay? And once somebody finishes, the teacher can restart the video and show you the next part. And then some people can go on to the harder part if they like, but I'm okay if some of you just stick with this stuff for the lesson. Okay, so if the video started again, we're probably on to some slightly harder questions for some people. But if you're still working on this, that's absolutely fine. This is tricky, so I'm more than happy for people to spend the whole lesson on that. So these examples, I'd still like everybody to listen to. It works in exactly the same way that the thing outside the bracket multiplies everything inside the bracket. So this 4r is multiplying this r and this 2. So 4r times r, I'm just going to come up here. If we just think about r times r, something times itself, we talked about this the other day, we talked about some square numbers. So squaring is when you times something by itself. So r times r would be r squared. But because we have this 4 as well, we have 4r squared. Don't worry if that seems a little bit tricky at the moment. We'll keep going and hopefully it will start to make a little bit more sense. So 4r times r is 4r squared. And then 4r times 2, that's 2 lots of this. So 2 lots of 4r is 8r. Okay. That's it, 4r squared plus 8r. The next one, 3m is multiplying s and it's multiplying 4. So 3m times s is 3ms. So we don't bother writing the times sign because we're lazy. And then 3m times 4, so we want 4 lots of 3m. So 4 times 3 is 12, and then we've got the m. So we have 12m. Okay. And then the last example, we have 6p, and that's timesing p. So again, p times itself is p squared, but because we have 6p, we have 6p times itself is 6p squared. And then 6p times minus 3. So negative 3 times 6p. Negative 3 times 6. 3 times 6 is 18. So negative 3 times 6 is negative 18. And then p. Okay. So I'd like you to all to write down these examples. Don't worry if these ones don't make much sense at the moment. I'll go through more of these when I'm back in school. Okay. I'm more than happy for you to go back and work on these ones. Or if you're on the earlier part of the sheet, that's fine as well. Okay. Well done.